Invitation came on cream-colored cardstock with my mother's calligraphy curling across the front like she'd been practicing for weeks. My father's 70th birthday. Black tie. The Whitfield estate in Greenwich, RSVP by the 18th. I held it under the kitchen light in my apartment in Cambridge and felt my stomach do that old familiar thing. The tight little knot it always made when something from home arrived. I was 31 years old. I built a company that had just closed a Series C at a $4.2 billion valuation. The previous Tuesday, I'd sat across from the editor-in-chief of Forbes for the third and final interview about my cover story, which would hit newsstands the following Monday. And yet, holding that piece of cardstock, I felt exactly like I had at 16, small, wrong, and bracing for impact. My name is Margaret Whitfield. My family calls me Maggie when they want something and Margaret when they're disappointed, which means they call me Margaret most of the time. I am the second of 3 children, sandwiched between my older brother Theodore, Teddy to everyone, Theo to his clients at the firm, and my younger sister Vivienne, who somewhere around age 12 decided she would be called Vivi forever and refused to answer to anything else. My father is Whitman Whitfield III. Yes, that's really his name. He is a constitutional law professor at Yale who has argued before the Supreme Court 4 times and lost only once, which he will remind you of within 15 minutes of meeting him. My mother, Charlotte, sits on the board of the Greenwich Symphony, the New Canaan Garden Club, and 3 different charities whose acronyms I can never keep straight. Teddy made partner at the family law firm at 32. Vivi married a cardiothoracic surgeon at 26 and posts pictures of her twins on a private Instagram account that has more followers than most small businesses. And then there's me. The one who dropped out of MIT her junior year. The one who lived in a basement apartment in Somerville for 6 years eating ramen and writing code until 2 in the morning. The one whose Christmas cards got increasingly polite over the years, the way you write to a cousin you don't really know anymore. What none of them knew, what I had kept locked away for almost a decade now. Was that the company I had built in that basement apartment? A quiet little biotech firm called Helion Therapeutics that I told them was still trying to get off the ground, had spent the last 3 years quietly developing the first FDA-approved drug to meaningfully slow the progression of early-stage Alzheimer's disease. The approval had come through in March. The stock had tripled by April. By the time my father's invitation arrived, I owned just under 60% of a company valued at over $4 billion. But what they saw when they bothered to look was a daughter who drove a 6-year-old Subaru, a daughter who flew economy, a daughter who, 2 Thanksgivings ago, when my sister-in-law cheerfully asked how my little science project was going, had smiled and said it was coming along and gone back to her green beans while Teddy laughed into his wine glass. I had reasons for the silence. Some of them were strategic. When you're a woman trying to raise money in biotech, the second a venture capitalist hears your last name has money attached to it, they assume you're playing with daddy's checkbook, and the terms get worse. Some of the reasons were legal. Some of them were about protecting my co-founder Priya, who had bet her life savings on me when no one else would. But if I'm being honest, and at this point in my life I owe myself that much, the biggest reason was simpler than any of that. I wanted to know what they thought of me when they thought I had nothing. Now I knew. I drove down to Connecticut on a Saturday afternoon in early October. The leaves just starting to turn along the Merritt Parkway, the sky the kind of brittle blue you only get in New England in the fall. I had on a black dress I'd bought at a sample sale in Boston 3 years ago. I had my grandmother's pearls, the only thing my mother's mother had left me, and the only piece of jewelry I owned that cost more than $200. I had a folder in my passenger seat, tucked under a road atlas containing an advance copy of next week's Forbes magazine that the editor had personally couriered to my office on Friday afternoon. I had not decided yet whether I was going to open that folder. I want to be clear about something. I did not drive down there planning to humiliate anyone. I drove down there the way I had driven down there every single year of my adult life, hoping, against every piece of evidence I had collected over 31 years, that this time would be different, that my father would ask me a real question and listen to the answer, that my mother would hug me without immediately commenting on my weight, that my brother would not, at some point between the appetizers and the entree, find a way to remind everyone at the table that I had made a mess of my life. The Whitfield estate sits on 11 acres off a road that doesn't appear on most maps. There's a gate and a long driveway lined with maples that my great-grandfather planted in 1937, and a stone house that the architectural magazines have photographed twice. When I pulled up, the valet, they had hired valets. Of course, they had hired valets. Looked at my Subaru the way you'd look at a raccoon in your kitchen. "I'm family," I said, before he could ask. "Park it wherever." I tucked the folder under my arm and walked up the steps. The entryway smelled like the white roses my mother always ordered from a florist in Stamford, and the lemon polish the housekeeper used on the banister. There were maybe 60 people already inside. Colleagues from Yale Law, partners from Teddy's firm, 2 former state senators, a federal judge my father had clerked for in 1979. I knew most of them by face, if not by name. They had been background figures in my childhood, the way certain trees are background figures in a forest. Margaret. My mother spotted me from across the foyer and crossed it in that gliding way she has, the way that makes everyone watch her without quite knowing why. She kissed the air near both my cheeks. Her perfume hadn't changed since I was 9, something French and powdery that made my nose itch. "You're late." "I'm exactly on time, Mom." The invitation said 5. Well, everyone else came at 4:30. There was no point in arguing this. I had stopped arguing this kind of thing somewhere around 22. "You look tired," she said, holding me at arm's length and examining me the way she examined the flower arrangements. "Have you been sleeping? Are you eating? You look thin in a bad way, Margaret, not a good way." "I'm fine, Mom, and what are you wearing?" "Is that the same dress you wore to Vivi's baby shower?" "It's a different dress." "It looks the same." "It's a different dress, Mom." She made the small humming noise that meant she didn't believe me and didn't care enough to argue. And then she steered me into the parlor where my father stood by the fireplace, with a glass of bourbon and a small group of men whose suits all cost more than my car. He saw me and his face did the thing it always does, a flicker of something like surprise, like he had genuinely forgotten he had a second daughter and was now remembering, followed immediately by a professionally warm smile. "Margaret, you made it. Happy birthday, Dad." He hugged me, Haptiat. He hugged me. It was the hug of a man who had read in a book once that hugging was important and had decided to do it on schedule. He smelled like bourbon and the same cologne he had worn since I was small. "Gentlemen, my daughter Margaret, she's in." "What is it you're doing now, sweetheart?" "Computers?" "Biotech, Dad, same as last year." "Right, biotech." He turned back to the federal judge. "Anyway, as I was saying about the Roberts opinion, I was dismissed. I had been in the room for 40 seconds and I was dismissed. I had been in the room for 40 seconds and I was already dismissed." I drifted toward the bar. The bartender was a young guy in a white shirt and black vest, who looked like he was working his way through grad school, and he gave me a small sympathetic smile when I asked for a club soda with lime. People who work at parties always know. That was when Teddy found me. My brother is a handsome man, in the way that confident men, with good dental work and the right haircuts are handsome. He's 6'2" and he plays squash 3 mornings a week, and he has the kind of laugh that fills rooms whether the room wants to be filled or not. He came up behind me at the bar and clapped his hand on my shoulder like we were old friends at a college reunion. "Mags." There she is, the prodigal daughter. "Hi, Teddy. You drove down. You should have flown." "I would have sent the car. I like driving." "In that thing of yours?" "Christ. Mags, is that still running? When are you going to let me buy you a real car?" "It runs fine, Teddy." He laughed and signaled the bartender for another scotch. "Listen, Mags, I've got to tell you something. I had the funniest conversation with Greg Pelham yesterday. You remember Greg? He was at the lake house that summer, and we got to talking about what everyone's doing these days, and I told him about your little startup thing. And he said," Teddy was already starting to laugh at his own joke before he'd finished it. He said, "Wait, the one who's still on food stamps." I felt my face do something. I'm not sure what. I felt the bartender go very still beside me. "I'm not on food stamps, Teddy." No, I know that was just a joke." Greg's memory is shot, But you know what I mean, right? Like, are you doing okay? Because I've told you 100 times if you need money. I don't need money, Teddy. You can say it. There's no shame in it. Dad and I were talking about it just last week, actually. There's an opening at the firm paralegal track, but you could test out of half the requirements with your math background, and I really think I'm not coming to work at the firm, Teddy. Just hear me out. I have heard you out. Every year. For 9 years. I am not coming to work at the firm. He held up his hand like I was being unreasonable, which is a thing he has been doing to me since I was 4. All right. I'm just saying. The offer stands. Vivi arrived at the bar then, in a green silk dress that I knew for a fact had been on the cover of Vogue 6 months ago, trailing the smell of jasmine perfume and the kind of casual confidence that comes from never having been told no in any meaningful way. Maggie. Oh my God, you came. I told Mom you wouldn't come. Why would I not come? I don't know. You missed Easter and Mother's Day, and I was in Geneva for Mother's Day. I told Mom 3 months in advance. Geneva. Right. She said the word the way you'd say Narnia. What were you doing in Geneva? Working? Working on what? My company, Vivi. The thing I have been working on for 9 years. Right. The little, she waved her hand vaguely, biotech thing. I was about to answer when my mother's voice rose above the murmur of the parlor, announcing that dinner was being served. The guests began to filter toward the dining room, which had been set with my grandmother's china and the silver candlesticks that came out only for funerals and milestone birthdays. I counted 48 place settings down the length of the table. I was seated between an associate at Teddy's firm, a young man named Reginald, who could not stop apologizing for forgetting my name, and an old college friend of my father's, who fell asleep before the salad course. Dinner crawled. There were toasts. There were 3 separate toasts to my father, each one longer and more boring than the last. There was a toast to Teddy for his recent victory in some appellate court case I had never heard of. There was a toast to Vivi for the twins, who were apparently advanced for their age in a way that no one could quite define but everyone agreed on. No one toasted me. No one toasted me because there was nothing to toast. By the time the entree plates were cleared and the staff began bringing out coffee, I had been sitting in that room for nearly 3 hours and I had said perhaps 8 sentences total. That was when Vivi tapped her wine glass with her dessert fork. I just want to say something, she said in that bright voice she uses when she's about to do something she thinks is charming. Because we're all here and we don't get together like this very often. And I think it's important to acknowledge family, right? Like, real family. So Daddy, thank you. Thank you for being the foundation of all of this. And Teddy, thank you for carrying on the firm. And Mom, thank you for being the heart of our home. She turned and looked down the table at me and I saw it coming, a half second before it arrived, the way you see a wave coming and you know you can't move fast enough. And Maggie, thank you for trying, honestly. Like, we all see you trying, and we love you for it. And listen, we know things have been hard, and the food stamps thing. I know Teddy made a joke about it earlier and that wasn't nice, but I want you to know that whatever you need, this family is here. Even if you never quite figure out the whole career thing, we've got you. Okay? She raised her glass. The table did not quite know what to do. Some people raised their glasses tentatively. The federal judge looked down at his plate. The bartender had come around with a tray of cordials and had frozen near the sideboard. I watched my father across the long expanse of the table. He was not looking at me. He had picked up his bourbon and he was swirling it, and he was wearing the small, tight smile he wore when he wished a thing were not happening but did not consider it his job to stop it. My mother said, "Vivi, darling, that was very sweet." I set down my napkin. I want to tell you that in this moment I felt rage, or fury, or some hot, wild thing that rose up in my chest. But I didn't. What I felt was very quiet and very clear. What I felt was the end of something. 31 years of trying to be small enough, polite enough, patient enough to be loved by these people. And it ended in that exact second, between the dessert course and the cordials, in the dining room of the house I had grown up in. "Vivi," I said. "Thank you for that. Really. I want you to know I heard every word." She beamed. She actually beamed, like a child who has been praised for a recital. "And before everyone has their coffee," I said, "I have a small announcement of my own. It's not the kind of announcement I usually make. I'm actually a very private person, as most of you know. But it occurred to me, sitting here tonight, that perhaps I have been too private. Perhaps I have allowed certain assumptions to flourish in this family that should have been corrected a long time ago. So, if you'll indulge me." I reached down beside my chair, where I had set the folder when I sat down, and I drew out the magazine. It was glossy. It had not been touched. The cover was a photograph the Forbes photographer had taken of me at our lab in Cambridge 2 months earlier. Me in a white coat, leaning against a counter, arms crossed, half smiling at the camera in a way the art director had spent 20 minutes coaxing out of me. Across the top, in the magazine's signature font, the Connecticut billionaire, how Margaret Whitfield built a $4 billion cure in a basement, and why she kept it a secret. I set it down on the table, face up, and slid it gently toward the center. My father choked. I had never actually seen my father choke before. He had been taking a sip of bourbon, and he made a sound that was halfway between a cough and a small wounded noise, and he set the glass down too hard, and bourbon sloshed onto the tablecloth. Teddy's face did something complicated. It tried to laugh. It tried to be confused. It tried to be skeptical. None of the expressions quite stuck. My mother said, "Margaret, what is that?" "That's next week's Forbes, Mom. It comes out Monday." "That can't be, it is." Vivi picked up the magazine. She held it close to her face. She turned it sideways as if checking for a seam. "This is a joke." "It's not a joke, Vivi. This is photoshopped. Someone made this for you. Forbes does not Photoshop fake covers for people, Vivi." Then, she set it down. She picked it up again. She looked at me, and for the first time in maybe a decade, I saw my sister actually see me. "Then what? What does this mean?" "It means I run a biotech company called Helion Therapeutics. It means we received FDA approval in March for a drug called Lyceran, which is the first compound shown in phase 3 trials to meaningfully slow the progression of early-stage Alzheimer's. It means our share price has tripled since approval. It means I personally own 58% of the company. It means, by Friday's close, my net worth was somewhere around $2.4 billion. The dining room was very quiet. The bartender was no longer pretending not to listen. "It also means," I said more softly, "that when Teddy made that joke earlier about food stamps, he was joking about something that, even if it had been true, even if I had needed food stamps at some point in my life, would not have been funny. There is no version of that joke that is funny. There are 13 million children in this country who don't get enough to eat. Some of them grow up to cure diseases. Some of them don't get the chance. The joke isn't on the people who needed help. The joke, Teddy, was always on you." My brother opened his mouth. He closed it again. He had no script for this, and Teddy without a script is a different person entirely. My father had recovered. He was dabbing at the tablecloth with his napkin, and he had arranged his face into something resembling a smile. "Margaret, sweetheart, why on earth didn't you tell us?" I looked at him for a long time before I answered. "I think you know why, Dad." "I don't. Honestly, I don't. We are your family. We would have supported you. We would have been there. Dad, 12 years ago when I told you I was leaving MIT to start a company, you said, and I remember this exactly because I wrote it down that night. I wrote it down in a notebook I still have. You said that you had not paid for an MIT education so I could play around with computers in a basement, and that if I left school I would not be welcome at Thanksgiving. Do you remember that?" He did not answer. 11 years ago when I came home for Christmas anyway, because Mom asked me to, you spent the entire dinner asking Teddy about his work and asking Vivi about her wedding plans, and you asked me exactly one question, which was whether I'd considered going back to school. Do you remember that? His mouth was a small, flat line. 6 years ago when I called you to tell you that we had closed our Series A, that I had personally raised $8 million, you told me that you hoped I wasn't taking money from anyone who was going to be disappointed. Do you remember that, Dad? Margaret, I'm not asking to fight, Dad. I'm asking you to remember. Because in a minute, when this conversation is over, you and Mom and Teddy and Vivi are going to start to rewrite tonight in your heads. You're going to start to remember it as the night we celebrated together. You're going to start to remember yourselves as proud parents, as a supportive brother, as a loving sister. And I need you to know, I need all of you to know, that I will remember it exactly the way it happened. I will remember Teddy's joke. I will remember Vivi's toast. I will remember the silence after, when not one of you stood up for me. I will remember that the only person in this room who looked uncomfortable on my behalf was the bartender. The bartender, to his credit, did not move a muscle. What do you want, Margaret? My mother's voice was very thin. What do you want from us? Nothing, Mom. That's what I'm trying to tell you. I don't want anything from you. I didn't come here tonight to ask for anything. I didn't even come here tonight to ask for anything. I didn't even come here tonight planning to do this. I came here tonight because Dad turned 70, and because some piece of me still hoped that maybe this year would be the year. And it wasn't. And that's all right. That's actually a relief, because now I know. I stood up. I'm going to drive back to Cambridge tonight. I have a board meeting on Monday morning. The magazine will be on newsstands the same day. I imagine your friends will have questions, and I want you to feel free to tell them whatever you like. Tell them you always knew. Tell them you raised me to be exactly this. Tell them whatever makes the next few weeks easier for you. I won't contradict you. I picked up the magazine. I left it open on the table. But I won't be coming to Christmas this year. Or Thanksgiving. Or any other holiday until I feel like coming, which I want to be honest with you, I don't feel like right now. I'm not cutting any of you off. You can call me. I'll pick up. We can have a coffee sometime, one-on-one, in a city that isn't this one. But the family dinners, the long table, the toasts, I'm done with those. I should have been done with those 10 years ago. I'm sorry it took me this long. I walked the length of the dining room. The 48 faces watched me go. I stopped beside the bartender on my way out, and I shook his hand, and I thanked him for the club soda. He smiled. A real smile, small and stunned, and a little bit thrilled, and he said very quietly, "Good luck, ma'am." The night air outside was cold and full of the smell of leaves. The valet brought my Subaru around. He didn't make any face at it this time. I drove home along the Merritt Parkway with the windows cracked and the radio off. Somewhere around Hartford I realized I was crying, not in a dramatic way, just steadily, the way you cry when something that has been wedged against your heart for 30 years has finally been removed and the space it leaves behind doesn't know yet what to do with itself. My phone started ringing somewhere around midnight. Vivi first, then my mother, then Teddy, then my mother again. I did not answer. I would, eventually, answer some of them. But not that night. On Monday morning, the magazine hit newsstands, and by lunchtime my voicemail had 31 messages, most of them from people who had not spoken to me in years, and several from people I had never met. By Wednesday, my mother had emailed me an apology that read like a press release, drafted, I suspected, with help from a publicist. By Friday, Teddy had sent a long, handwritten letter that I read once and put in a drawer to read again in a year, when I might be ready to think about it. By the following Sunday, Vivi had sent a single text that just said, "I'm sorry. I really am. I didn't know I was that person. I read it 3 times. I didn't answer it, not yet, but I didn't delete it either. My company kept growing. We started phase 2 trials for a second compound that fall. Priya and I hired our 200th employee in December. I bought a small house in Cambridge with a yard for a dog I hadn't gotten yet, and I started keeping a list of the things I wanted my life to look like. And most of them had nothing to do with money or magazine covers or any of the rest of it. What I learned, what I am still learning, is that there is no version of success that will make people who don't love you start loving you. The Forbes cover did not change my father. The $4 billion did not change my brother. The thing that changed was me, the long, slow business of realizing that I had spent 31 years auditioning for a role that had already been cast before I was born, and that the audition had never been the point, and that the only door out of that room was the one I had been too scared to walk through. I walked through it on a Saturday night in October, in a black dress I bought at a sample sale, holding a magazine I had not yet decided whether I would open. I am glad I opened it, not for the reason you might think, not because it ended anything or proved anything or won anything. I am glad I opened it because for the first time in my whole adult life I let myself be seen by the people who had refused to see me on my terms and not on theirs. And then I went home. I think about that drive home along the Merritt Parkway more than I think about the dinner itself. The dinner is a clear memory, sharp at the edges, but it's the drive home that taught me what I needed to learn. Because the thing is, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel powerful. I felt tired, and I felt sad, and I felt the strange grief of finally letting go of something I had been holding on to for so long that my hand had forgotten how to open. For 31 years, I had believed that if I just worked hard enough, achieved enough, became valuable enough, my father would finally look at me the way he looked at Teddy. My mother would finally introduce me to her friends without that small, apologetic pause. Vivi would finally stop using the word trying like it was a diagnosis. I had built a $4 billion company, partly because I wanted to cure a terrible disease, and partly, if I'm honest, because some quiet, desperate part of me believed that the Forbes cover would be the key that finally opened the door I had been knocking on my whole life. It wasn't. It never was. That door doesn't have a key. That door isn't even a door. Here's what I know now that I didn't know then. People treat you the way they treat you because of who they are, not because of who you are. Teddy made that joke about food stamps, not because I had failed to earn his respect, but because cruelty was a tool he had learned to use early and never set down. Vivi gave that toast not because I needed her pity, but because pity was the only language she had been taught to speak to anyone she suspected of being beneath her. My father stayed silent not because I had not done enough, but because silence was the inheritance he had received from his own father, and he had never thought to question it. None of that was about me. It was never about me. The hard work, the long nights, the basement apartment, the years of ramen and code and quiet doubt, those things made the company. They didn't make me worthy of love. I was already worthy of love. I had been worthy of love. When I was 8 years old and my father forgot my piano recital, I had been worthy of love when I was 20 and dropped out of MIT. I had been worthy of love every single day of those 31 years, and no magazine cover was ever going to make me more worthy or less worthy than I already was. What I want to say to anyone listening is this: build the thing you want to build, cure the disease, write the book, raise the children, plant the garden. Do it because the work matters, because the world is better for having it, because you came into this life with something to give and you owe it to yourself to give it. But do not, for 1 second longer than you have to, do it for the people who decided before they ever met you that you were not enough. They will not change when you succeed. They will only show you, more clearly, who they were all along. And when they do, you will be free. I drove home that night, and I went to work on Monday morning, and I kept going. That's the whole lesson. You keep going, you let the door close, you build a life on the other side of it.